Okay, so in order to understand the interwar periods, first you have to understand World War I, which was the beginning bookend of the interwar period. So World War I started on June 28th, 1914, and it was a byproduct of a nationalistically motivated assassination by the Black Hand, which was it was a nationalist group that assassinated Archduke Ferdinand in the Balkans. And because of this set off a chain reaction, and that was mainly due to a lot of the alliances that existed during this time period in World War I. So some of the main ones, there was the Triple Alliance, which was in 1882, which was Germany and Austria-Hungary, which so Austria-Hungary and Germany were originally aligned, that was the Dual Alliance. And that the Dual Alliance was created by a treaty on October 7th, 1879, and it was a part of Otto von Bismarck's systems of alliances in order to prevent and limit war by being aligned with everybody. So as you can see, the date, this was happening in the 1870s, so the build up to World War I was a really long period of time, and it was kind of a lot of little things that just combined together to create this, explosion that was set off by the assassination. So there was the Dual Alliance, which then became the Triple Alliance in 1882 when Germany and Austria-Hungary aligned with Italy. So those were the three. That was the Triple Alliance. And then the Entente Cordiale, which was a series of agreements signed on April 8th, 1904, which was between the United Kingdom and the French Republic, and that eventually became the Triple Entente, which was Britain, France, and Russia. So these were basically the two main alliances. You had Britain, France, and Russia on one side. Eventually America would join them, and then you had Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy on the other side. So these were the two major groups in World War I. And because these countries were all aligned with other smaller countries, when the Archduke was assassinated, it just kind of set off a chain reaction, because now everybody had to pick a side in the war, and all of a sudden you had all of Europe involved in this war. So so there were different plans to the war. So Germany's plan was the Schlieffen plan, and the goal was to avoid war on both fronts, because Germany's in the middle, so they didn't want war with France and war with Russia at the same time. So the goal was to have a lightning war with France and take Paris and have that all squared away before Russia had enough time to gather up its troops and attack from their end. So this plan ended up failing because Great Britain mobilized a lot faster than Germany expected them to. And if you remember earlier, Germany and France, or Great Britain and France were aligned. So when Germany obviously started attacking France, Britain got involved, and they got involved a lot faster than Germany was expecting, and then that pulled Russia into it too. So then they were fighting a two-front war, which they did want to avoid. However, eventually Russia did pull out of the war, and that was due to the Bolshevik Revolution. So this was a violent revolution, and it was caused by economic hardship, food shortages, and government corruption. And it ended the end of the Romanov dynasty, which was a 500-year-long dynasty. They were the Russian czars, and so the Bolsheviks killed all Tsar Nicholas and his family. I believe he had 4 daughters, 1 son, and then his wife, so they were all killed, so that way there was no chance that even one of them would come back and make a claim to the throne. So the Bolsheviks seized power, and they were led by Vladimir Lenin, and they would later become the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So they renamed Russia. Russia was no longer Russia, it was the Soviet Union. It kind of encompassed Russia and then a lot of smaller countries kind of surrounding Russia. And then much of Western Europe viewed Russia as undeveloped because they didn't go through the Industrial Revolution at the same time as everyone, but they did have a lot of manpower, which was of use to them during World War I, because they were just kind of they had a lot of bodies, which helped in their battle with Germany, but this revolution, combined with all the violence of it, there was Bloody Sunday of 1905, which was a precursor to this. So this had been building up for a while, and a lot of them were dying in World War I, which wasn't, didn't help morale. Like, the Russian people didn't want to fight this war, and the Tsar had them in it. So the Romanovs were executed by the Bolsheviks on July 16th, 1918, which pulled them out, and the Russian Civil War officially ended in 1923, with Lenin's Red Army claiming victory and establishing the Soviet Union. So Russia did pull out of World War I in 1918. So they were in it for a majority, and then they pulled out. And the Americans joined near the end. I believe they were involved in it for technically like 9 months. So the war changed a lot of political alliances in Europe, but it also introduced just a lot of new technology. So there were new battle tactics that involved submarines, trench warfare, tanks, and a lot more like plane fighting. So you had like the Red Baron, and different countries and alliances took different tactics to it. So like some used the planes to attack at night under the cover of darkness, but that often meant you had difficulties actually seeing where you were at and your targets that you were aiming to hit, while some planes would attack during the day, but then they had the trouble of they were visible and they were seen. So it was kind of a lot of trial and error for these different battle tactics, because they were all new, and the new battle tactics contributed to a lot of death, like the new weapons, the machine guns, and all that stuff. So there was a really high death toll for World War I, and it hadn't ever been seen anything like that before. So a lot of people went into World War I with like a positive outlook on it. It was like, oh, we haven't had a war in a while. This is, it was called the Great War. But very soon that attitude started to change when the death tolls began racking up. So by the time World War I had ended, there was almost an entire generation of men that did not return home from World War I. So it's setting a very dark tone for the interwar period. There was also a lot changing on the home front, because obviously you had a lot of the young men going off to fight in the war, which left their wives and children at home on the home front. So that changed a lot of things that like women were starting to work in traditionally male career spaces, and that wasn't something that could be changed back when the men returned. It was an irreversible change that changed the look of the home front. So there were a lot of changes that went in that set the stage for this like very interesting period of the interwar years. And that is pretty much all the context, a brief overview of all the things that went into World War I and how it changed society to set up for the interwar periods. And World War I ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, and it was dubbed the war to end all wars, but obviously that didn't happen because there's World War II. So really, the interwar periods is more just like a pause, because all those alliances that started World War I didn't exactly go away. They kind of subsided. There was like different, peace treaties and that sort of thing. But it was really just a pause in a conflict that I had been building for like 50 years before this. So that's pretty much all the context for World War I, and now we will discuss the interwar periods.
Okay, can you give us some backstory on the end of World War I?
On the end of World War I?
Yeah.
What part of the end of, are we talking about like the peace treaty negotiations, or like the end of the fighting?
The peace treaty, yeah.
Okay, so like World War I has ended, right? And this is after, it's like 5-6 years of fighting. The lines really haven't moved. Millions of people have been injured and killed, right? The German economy is almost totally collapsed. And so there's an armistice, a ceasefire agreement. And then the parties get together at Versailles for months of arduous negotiation. And it's not just the Allies and the Germans, like people from all over the world show up at Versailles because they're trying to, achieve various different goals. Like Wilson goes with his 14 points and he wants to make the world this better place, but the British and the French just want to punish the Germans for starting this war. And then like Ho Chi Minh's there from Vietnam because he wants to gain independence. The Japanese are there, but no one cares.
Okay. What tensions remained after World War I?
All of them.
All of
them. Yeah, okay. Yeah. All of the pre-World War I tensions essentially still will exist after World War I because they don't do anything to address any of those tensions.
Okay.
I guess they create the League of Nations, but that doesn't do anything. It's kind of useless.
Okay. How effective was the Treaty of Versailles?
Well, as you can tell from my previous comments, I believe it was 100% totally effective and solved all issues. There definitely were never any other wars after the Treaty of Versailles was signed.
All
And it
right.
definitely was not one of the biggest causes of World War II.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, it's terribly ineffective treaty, terribly flawed treaty, because it doesn't actually address any of the things that were causing the war. And so one of the things the Treaty of Versailles does is it causes resentment in Germany because Germans have to like accept responsibility for the war. The German people don't like that. German politicians don't like that, and it's going to be one of those avenues that a guy like Hitler can use to come to power, because there is this deep resentment in Germany over the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which have crippled like the economy in the country of Germany. So in that respect, like it's a deeply, deeply flawed treaty. It doesn't solve the issues of imperialism. It creates the League of Nations and this League of Nations mandate system, and it like tears up chunks of the world and just gives them to the British and the French. And so that doesn't do anything to stop like this imperial competition for land. It's just sort of redistributed the land to other countries. Yeah, the Treaty of Versailles is not a good treaty. Like the League of Nations might be a good idea on a global like politics perspective, but the way it's implemented is totally ineffective.
Okay. How did countries move into life immediately after World War One?
What are you talking about?
Like, how do they get back to their routines, like, after the war?
Well, we're talking about countries, the people in those countries, the economies of those countries.
Like, in general, like, Germany, for instance.
Germany didn't. No. So, like, Germany emerges from that, and the economy is hamstrung. Like, the whole, the Ruhr Valley, the river on the border with France, like, that's technically all that industrial capacity is sort of marginally given under the control of France, right? Like, the things they can produce militarily, the size of the military are limited. They have those debt payments that they have to pay to the Allies, which hamstrings the German economy and is going to cause hyperinflation in Germany. Like the only way that Germany kind of gets back to normal is they reindustrialize and start violating the Treaty of Versailles and creating military stuff. If you're talking about like France and Britain, the economies of France and Britain, I don't know that they ever really fully recover from fighting World War I before the Great Depression sets in. So you're sort of in a period of recession there. So I don't know that they get back to normal. And if you're talking about like soldiers who fought in the war, there is no going back to normal for them because of the trauma of going through that war, right? Like you're talking about, an entire generation of young men in some instances that's been wiped out by that war. Like, everyone in the graduating class from this high school is now dead because they all died in battle, right? And so, like, that's very traumatic. And so I don't know for a lot of those countries that participated in that war that there really is a getting back to normal, right?
Okay, and then was there any form of veteran care?
It's not something that I am an expert on. I am unaware of any real veteran care in the terms of what we would think of today, right? Like today we think about like, okay, well, we're giving them some mental health, options, some therapy. That stuff really wasn't around back then, right? We didn't really have an understanding of what was going on in people's heads. Like, are they going to be treated for the wounds they received? Sure, they'll get some treatment there. In the United States, and I don't know about what's going on in European governments, but one of the big pushes in the United States was to give these guys what they call bonuses. Essentially, all the veterans were put on pensions that were funded by the federal government. And that becomes a big political issue when the Great Depression hits, because one of the first things they try to do is stop paying those pensions. And that leads to like a protest march on Washington from these veterans who were in World War I, because like, hey, we want these pensions. Like, it's what we live off of. So like there was an attempt in the United States to give them like money to pay for them, like what had happened. But as far as effective like medical or psychological treatments, yeah, I don't know that countries did a good job with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all.
All
Thank
right.
you.
How did the Treaty of Versailles carry into the interwar periods? Well, it was an important role in the rise of Nazism in Germany, and it put full blame on Germany for World War I. It limited their army, their navy size, and allowed trial for German officials for war crimes. And they had to pay full reparations for the Allies, which they could not afford, so they were in a major debt, and they were forced to surrender all colonies they held.
What new policies were established to prevent another war?
So one of the first kind of policies or expectations that was put into place was the League of Nations. So this was established with the Treaty of Versailles, where it laid the foundation for what would become the United Nations, but it was meant to kind of like handle, mediate any types of disputes that would break out between European countries. It promoted free trade, open trade, lifting those barriers, and the problem with the League was that there wasn't really any power or force behind it. The creator of the League was Woodrow Wilson, and the United States did not even ratify to support the League of Nations. So once Japan and then Germany started kind of becoming much more aggressive, and Italy in 1935, they started becoming much more aggressive, the League would kind of say, oh, you're not supposed to do that, you need to back off, but they didn't have the support to really reinforce what they were doing. You also had the Kellogg-Briand Pact that came out in the 1920s, and that was an attempt to kind of say that war should not be used as a means of solving conflict. Instead, you should use some type of mediation process. Obviously, again, not super successful. The big one that we know as far as the big leaders was that appeasement policy. So really at its height at the Munich conference, when Britain and France are going to meet with Germany, and Germany's talking about its sites of the Sudetenland. And they come together and say, okay, we're going to appease them at this point. We're going to say, that's fine. You can have the Sudetenland. We understand the cultural connections to the territory, but that's it. You can't have anything else. And yet he continues to do it. So, you know, when I was teaching, I always said it was like they give the mouse a cookie. So they gave him this thing and then he wanted more. So appeasement was really kind of that policy as they were all economically struggling, but it doesn't work. World War II breaks out.
Ready? What are your opinions and thoughts on the interwar period?
No war, very good. No war, very good. Yeah.
How effective was the Treaty of Versailles?
Not. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? Not effective.
What do you think was the biggest outcome of World War I and that changed the period after?
It helped lead to World War II. That's the big thing.
Other than that, like what about tensions?
It decreased tensions for a little bit, but it made it so that the tensions would rise in the long term.
That's it, thank you.
The League of Nations was established at the end of the First World War to prevent another world war and to keep peace. However, it proved unable to prevent aggression. This was mainly due to the fact that it had no standing army to enforce its decisions, making it possible for countries to ignore them. Additionally, the USA and Russia, two of the world's greatest powers, were not members of the League, further weakening it. The ineffectiveness of the League became especially obvious in the 1930s as aggression increased in Europe and Asia. Some of the biggest failures of the League were Japan conquering Manchuria in 1932, when the League supported Chinese sovereignty. However, this caused Japan to leave the League of Nations. In 1933, Hitler announced that Germany would leave the League of Nations as well. And in 1935, Italy invaded Abyssinia, which the League condemned, but France and Britain were caught making a secret agreement to give Abyssinia to Italy. All of this destroyed the authority of the League, leaving it powerless to stop Germany when it decided to invade Poland.
Okay, so this is how some of the countries in Europe recovered after World War I. So first we got the United Kingdom. So So despite being victorious, the United Kingdom was no longer the dominant global power it once was. The war had taken a great toll on the economy, and the British Empire faced growing challenges. In fact, the United States became the world's greatest power, I think. Okay, so after the British economy suffered, the British economy suffered even though most of the battles were fought outside of their territory, but the war effort had drained a lot of their resources and drained a lot of their manpower. So after the war, the UK focused on rebuilding their economy through investing in infrastructure and through their colonies, although they had to break some of those apart soon after World War II, I believe. The next country that we're talking about is France, and France had suffered significant devastation during the war, especially in regions like northeastern France, where a lot of the fighting just above the Maginot Line was fought. The French government lowered immigration barriers to allow for new workers to flood into the country and to replace the labor shortages that they had. And reconstruction efforts were funded partly by the reparations made by Germany after the Treaty of Versailles, although the reparations from Germany mainly came from Allied money from the Dawes Plan.
You look scared.
Alright, lock it. Alright, and then next, the Russian Revolution, which was in 1917, had already transformed the country during the war, but this would completely change their economic policy into a more communist command economy. And Russia, anyways, there's a lot of problems with Russia in regards to their economy and in regards to their rebuilding after their civil war and after World War I too, because they did see a lot of damages from both wars. Now, Germany was the main target that the Treaty of Versailles blamed. So they kind of went broke, because the Treaty of Versailles had very harsh reparations, and they lost territory like Poland, part of Poland, and their military was heavily restricted, so they couldn't build their military. So there's three things that really affected the German economy. That would be hyperinflation, which is when your economy inflates to extreme levels. Like, I think it's the German marks. They went to like millions to buy like a piece of bread. It's crazy. Then they had unemployment. There's more, like, they had one of the greatest unemployment rates. I think it was 1 in 3, I think. And then they also had social unrest, and their citizens would turn to more radical political parties like fascism and communism. And those were the three major problems that the Germans faced. And the Weimar Republic that replaced Germany struggled to stabilize the economy and was a very weak republic overall. It was just basically controlled the West, but not controlled well. And this would lead to the rise of extremist movements like the Nazis. Yeah, that's about it.
The Great Depression and how it affected Europe. European markets were interconnected with American markets, so they depended on U.S. post-World War I. When the American market crashed, so did Europe's. The war gave great demand to products and crops, so many started to raise their production. But after the war was over, there was too much supplies, and it led to overproduction. Many went into debt that they could not afford to pay back. Economic instability led to political instability and gave rise to dictatorial regimes. The Dawes Plan reduced German war reparations and provided a loan for recovery. Many Europeans invested in the U.S. stock market, but due to speculation, the stock market started to decline and many investors pulled out, leading to the stock market crash in October. Yeah, 1929.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did countries recover economically from World War I?
So initially, the countries, and we're talking about in Europe, were really struggling because a lot of the battles all the battles were fought in Europe. So there was kind of, in some areas, a brief recession. So that actually happened in Britain, and then Germany and France, but they all were able to recover. Into the 20s, you did see some growth in industrialization, just kind of like in the 1920s in America, where you had the roaring 20s. There was this kind of movement up, but by 1929, you're going to see that it all kind of crashes. So the United States had attempted to provide some economic support to Germany, specifically with the Dawes Plan, which was where they would provide financial aid to Germany, loans to Germany to then pay back their reparations to the other allies, Britain and France. And then Britain and France would pay back the United States because they owed them as well, and the United States would gain some. But in 1929, when that Dawes Plan is going to crash because of the Great Depression and the stock market crash, you're going to see that European countries are all going to struggle to recover. Germany is hit the hardest. I think their unemployment, I wrote this down, was over 30% unemployed. The United States at its height, I think we had at one point up to 25%, or pretty close to that. But you're gonna see that Germany is hit the hardest, and so you'd see tons of like images on the news of like kids playing with the money because it really just was no longer valuable. So that's kind of where they're at. By the 1930s, mid 1930s, you start seeing it levels out again. Russia was a little bit different as far as the economy is concerned because they obviously are going to be communist. So you had Lenin's new economic policy, and then that lasted about a year. And then you had Stalin come in, and he vastly industrialized the country of Russia, but at the expense of millions of lives. So that's how they recovered.
So I'll tell you about how Adolf Hitler rose to power. So Adolf Hitler, after World War I, he actually served in the German military during World War I, but when he returned to Munich, he found out that the Weimar Republic kind of sucked. It was just kind of mid. So he joined the German Worker Party, which is kind of socialist. You know, he created the term National Socialist. So, you know, it's kind of socialist, but it's also kind of authoritarian. So that's what he did. But he was really good at speaking, and he's really good at using propaganda to bolster himself. Who's walking outside? To bolster himself as a political leader in his party. So he quickly rose up the ranks. He became the leader and became mass meetings, propaganda, rallies, everything to do to get more support and more support from the people. And the Great Depression, which happened, caused the hyperinflation as I talked about, and further unrest ensued, and Hitler positioned himself as like one of the greats. I'm pretty sure he went into jail at some point, but I don't know when. And in the 1932, Hitler ran against von Hindenburg, President von Hindenburg, and although he lost, he got so popular, it was crazy. And then he was appointed Chancellor of Germany because of his popularity. And eventually, he just started finessing his way as Chancellor of Germany to like create laws, like create more support for him to help him become the ultimate leader of Germany. And he consolidated power by August 1934 when he merged the chancellorship and presidency, kicked out von Hindenburg and became the ruler of Germany. And then he transformed Germany into a totalitarian state. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. This is Victor.
After the end of World War I, many countries gained independence such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. This happened due to the breakup of many multinational empires such as the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the German Empire. However, these empires were hastily broken up into new countries, unequally distributing cultures and ethnicities, leading to conflict within the countries and a rise of nationalism.
So the topic that we're going to be talking about now is the rise in power for Allied. We're going to be talking about fascism versus totalitarianism. So fascism is a political ideology characterized by extreme nationalism, authoritarianism, and the suppression of political opposition, whereas totalitarianism extends to all matters of the state, and where the state has unlimited power and controls all aspects of life for every citizen. So fascism is more like a party thing, totalitarianism is more like an idea, right? I'm asking you.
Yeah, right.
Okay. That's what I like
More
to
like
hear.
a government style.
Alright, so now we're going to talk about how Benito Mussolini kind of came to power. So Mussolini, he was a former socialist during World War I, but he fled from the movement, and he rose to power through his fascist belief. In 1919, he created the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, which was basically started the fascist party. But he officially created it in 1921. The name fascist was actually derived from the Italian word for fascio, which is like a bundle of tools that you're supposed to use. You learned about that in IB history. And this party emphasized national unity, like Yeah. Alright, and then one of Mussolini's policies was the spazio vitale, which is the expansionist concept of Italian fascism. I think it means room to live, space to live in, right? And so what Mussolini wanted to do was to cover the Mediterranean in Italian influence, which would mean from northern Africa all the way to Turkey, all the way up to everything around Italy. But this was basically Mussolini's main goal for his expansionist policies. Thank you.
10 of your Fahey.
Oh.
I literally said that.
Anyways, that was their main policy, to expand and become stronger. Then now we have Francisco Franco, which is, me personally, that's my favorite dictator of the time. He's the Spanish military general who led the nationalist forces during the Spanish Civil War. And he ruled since 1939, which was the Spanish Civil War. And he was a very, very fascist dictator, but he didn't really do much. He just kind of bummed around for a living. And then next we got Hitler. Hitler was certainly an interesting individual. He did a lot of things, but he rose to power.
So, in what ways were the military veterans reintegrated back into society?
So following World War I, there were attempts, both Britain, France, and Germany all had their ministries or their departments that would provide vocational training, vocational support. So Britain actually had, I looked up a specific act, it's the Education Act of 1918 that paid for veterans to receive higher education or vocational training. They provided different types of welfare services to them and different types of overall training services. It still was not as much as they really needed to have because they were not as informed. Obviously, they had shell shock. A lot of them had shell shock, and we didn't fully understand the consequences of that. But they did try and provide different types of alternatives to them. GI Bill, which would have been the US, so you don't necessarily need that information, but they did provide funding for, again, higher education, social welfare programs for the veterans, and tried to help them kind of get access back into the job force, not related to the military.
Okay.
So now we're going to be talking about famines, but they only really happened in Russia and kind of in Germany because hyperinflation. But we're going to be talking about Russia. So the early 1920s, Russia experienced a lot of famines, but that was kind of because two reasons really. The weather wasn't really great, and then also the collectivization of agriculture by whoever the Russian leader was at the time.
Vladimir Lenin, yeah.
Yeah.
He was the first one.
Yeah. Lenin collectivized agriculture, and it kind of went downhill, so millions of people suffered from starvation, and that kind of sucked. And also, in 1930s, 1931 to 1933, there's the Great Famine called Holodomor. Okay, you know what it is. But it was also caused by collectivization policy, and a lot of people died, but also affected other states right next to Russia, just like Ukraine and Kazakhstan, and also a lot of Eastern Europe. Anyways, that's it. Thank you so much.
There were also many new advancements and innovations following World War I, such as automobiles, new weapons like machine guns, warplanes, tanks, and submarines, all of which would play significant roles in World War II. Additionally, there were also new medical practices like new surgical techniques and burn treatments, prosthetic limb advancements, skin grafts, blood transfusions, and more.
The influenza pandemic of 1918. The Spanish influenza is an airborne respiratory virus that killed millions. It happened in 3 waves. The first wave spread during World War I, and 25 million deaths were estimated, but researchers believe that there was 40 to 50 million deaths. Don't get the flu.
Go!
Okay, so in 1937, Japan started to conquer much of eastern China and Korea, which started the war in the Pacific. But this didn't really happen in Europe until 1939, when Germany started invading Poland and Yugoslavia and Western Europe, and then by using blitzkrieg tactics, which was lightning warfare that overwhelmed opponents with troops, air power, and tanks. And once they broke through the lines of enemies, they intimidated the civilian populations to crush the rest of the army. this, as a result of the invasion of Poland, it started the European front of the war.
Sorry, where's Poland on that map?
Here-ish.
Oh, okay.
And then this also resulted in the Phony War, which was October of 1939 to April of 1940, because there was not any fighting on land. So this ended when Germany used blitzkrieg to invade the Low Countries in France in order to get the Rhineland back. And then this created Vichy France, which was a puppet state, and Nazis controlled north of it. And then Charles de Gaulle started to make a French army while in exile, which created a strong resistance movement that worked to undermine Germans and provide intelligence on German movement. Operation Barbarossa was Germany's plan to invade the USSR in order to get its natural resources, but the Soviets had initial losses, and they used their superior defenses and knowledge of the Russian winter to repel the German attack, like was seen during Napoleon's reign here. The German controlled some of the USSR, but they weren't able to subdue the country completely, and Russia fended off Germany in the siege of Stalingrad from 1941 to 44. Then after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, the US joined with the Allies, which helped them immensely because of their superior resources and the fact that they just weren't attacked any besides Pearl Harbor. Britain was bombed in 1940 by Germany, but the Air Force protected a direct invasion of the land. And Hitler tried to conquer some of North Africa for the natural resources, but the Allies won control after a 4-year battle. Then Allies also overtook France and Rome in order to overthrow Mussolini, which got him killed. It has also led to them accessing the airfields there. The Allies invaded Normandy in order to liberate Western Europe from Nazi control, which was led by Britain and Eisenhower from the US. Within a month, they freed most of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and the German counter-assault at the Battle of the Bulge failed. And then at the same time as the Battle of the Bulge, the Russians were able to drive out Germans. At the Yalta Conference, France took part in German administration, which divided Germany and Berlin to occupation zone, in Eastern Europe had free elections, but they didn't have as much harsh reparation from the Treaty of Versailles as they learned from that. And the Pacific Front was led by the US and ended with atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Holocaust started because of the Jewish question in Germany, which was how to end Jewish influence in Germany. Hitler used Jews as a scapegoat for Germany's failures from the Treaty of Versailles and the economic failures of the Great Depression, which resulted in him restricting Jewish rights, and then the Kristallnacht, which attacked Jews and made them leave communities and left them in ruin to deport them to concentration camps and ghettos. The US and other European powers didn't do much to stop this, as anti-Semitism was largely accepted. And this also resulted in the final solution from Germany, which was to murder all Jews and to solve the Jewish question. This was resulted in concentration camps where Jews and other minorities such as Slavs, Romas, gay people, people with mental and physical disabilities, socialists and communists were worked until they died, and then they were experimented on and just gassed to kill them. Many camps were designated to kill just everyone in general who went there, like Auschwitz. The liberation of Nazi camps was not a primary objective of the Allied military campaign, but Soviet, US, British, and Canadian troops freed prisoners from the SS guards, and they provided them with food and medical support and collected evidence for war crimes, trials.
All right, can you introduce yourself?
My name is David Spullen. Yeah.
Where are you from?
Germany,
What city?
Stuttgart.
Can you explain where that is?
That's in southwest Germany.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna get on with our interview. Is that all right with you?
Yes.
What do you know about? Are you familiar with World War I, interwar, and World War II eras?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. We'll get on with our first question. Our first question is: are you a primary source?
No, I'm not 100 years old.
Can you explain why?
Because I'm only 17 years old.
What's your date of birth?
I think November 1st, 2006.
You think?
You think?
I think that. I know,
Can you prove it?
I might got lied to.
Can you prove it? Like you could be 100 years old.
I can show you my ID if you want.
Some technical difficulties.
Someone's unprepared.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry that I don't have my ID ready.
Hey, Chris.
That should also prove to you that I'm actually German.
How do you know I didn't fake ID?
Got a fake German ID.
Dude, this isn't even him.
That's you?
This is not him.
Damn. Oh, let's start like a little eagle one.
An
This
eagle.
is January 11th, 2006.
No, it's not. We invert the dates. You invert the dates. I don't know why Americans do that, but it's strange.
Why are you weird?
We have the
So
dates
why are
in
Germans
front.
weird
So
about
I would like
I think
to
that
state
it says-
on record that he was born January 11th, 2006. All right. Now we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah.
I'll believe in that idea. I think it's fake, but whatever. All right. From a German perspective, what are your opinions and thoughts on the interwar periods between World War I and World War II?
The Golden 20s
Grace!
and the Weimar Republic.
I stapled it to my folder. You cussed in the middle of that and now I can't post it.
Just censor.
You can cut it. What's the stupidest thing about
Anyways, I was talking about kind of like the Golden 20s
Yeah.
in Germany. Do we really have that in Germany?
Yeah, we did. It was a period where what I got told was much more freedom for women and a lot of money, parties, stuff like that.
But this was post World War I, right?
Yeah.
So was the country not devastated?
Well, it depends on where you are, I think.
Okay, what about the Great Depression? What are your opinions and thoughts on that?
Oh, many people were
On a
poor.
German perspective.
Many people were poor, did not have a lot of money, starvation.
Anything else to add on to that?
I wouldn't say so.
What are your thoughts on hyperinflation during the interwar period?
Well, the hyperinflation was, I think, because of all the reparation costs we have to pay to France. And yeah, like one day you could buy with something a house and the next day only your bread. It was not good, I think.
Do you remember the German currency from back then?
Was it, how was it called? Was it the Reichsmark or was that later?
The marks.
Mark, yeah.
I like that from you. I like that too. Okay. And how are the effects of World War I, the interwar years, and World War II still seen in Germany?
I would say World War II is probably the biggest impact now because we have like a lot of memorials still.
Do you think it's still economically like restructured Germany as it is today, like the Weimar Republic?
No, I wouldn't say so because like we have a completely different constitution now. I mean, our current constitution learned a lot from what not to do from the Weimar Republic constitution.
I like that. I like that. And the final question is, how's it like living in those periods?
I mean, you can probably ask my great grandpa that. I sadly can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for the interview. That'll be all.